The big housing market crash. Is it ever going to happen? I am sure that's a question a lot of people have on their minds, and I'm going to attempt to answer that in today's video. Forewarning, this is not going to be a promise about if anything's going to happen, but what these videos always are just my opinions on where I think things might go based on what's happening today. That's what they've always been. That's what they'll always will be. Now, this is something I've been wondering myself a lot too, especially with how much our government has shown their willingness to kind of prop up this current economy, and also most recently the housing market, with all the new initiatives recently announced by the White House about giving people tax credits to sell houses, giving people tax credits to buy houses, all sorts of different things that can have a big stimulus effect on the housing market. And it's easy to think that, we can't really ever have a crash based on all these things happening, right? If they keep coming in with different rescue packages and incentives for people to buy homes or sell homes, then it's reasonable to say that maybe it's never going to crash, because now the government has their hand in the pot permanently when it comes to the price of housing. Even here in the state of Florida, the other day I announced to you guys how the state of Florida is pumping $400 million into the Florida housing market this year in the form of different grants and first-time homebuyer programs, things like that. And by the way, everybody in the comments of that video who think that the Hometown Heroes is just for nurses, cops, and firefighters, it's not. If you are below a certain income threshold, you can get your hands on that money. They extended that last year to everybody. It was initially meant to be just for people like that, but now it's for anybody who makes less than the income threshold. I think it's 80% of the median income of the area. But here's something to think about. We saw a record amount of stimulus be pumped into the economy during the pandemic, and now that most of that is largely over, there is still a lot of stimulus being pumped into the housing market in general, in the form of 1% down mortgages, in the form of first-time homebuyer tax credits, in the form of grants that essentially give people free money to go out and buy homes. So there are things that are still happening right now, but despite all of that, the housing market is slowing down dramatically right now. Even big companies that have been bullish on the housing market for a long time are starting to change their tune on what they think is going to happen. In fact, Zillow, they just revised down quite a bit their forecast of where they think the 2024 housing market is going to go. Just a month ago, their 12-month outlook was that home prices were going to grow 4.2% in 2024. Now they're downward revising it to saying, it's only going to grow by 0.8%. So essentially, not really any growth, just kind of staying flat. And at the same time, we're seeing record unaffordability in the housing market. People would need to make 70 to 80% more income in order to afford homes at today's prices, or prices would need to fall 41% to essentially return to pre-pandemic affordability, or we need to see mortgage rates come down by 4.3%. Well, mortgages are at 7% right now, which means that they'd have to be in the high 2s and low 3s again to return the housing market to affordability. And the likelihood of any one of those three things happening right now are slim to none. So the short answer is, I do think we can still have a housing crash, but this time it will be different, right? Just like we hear all the time, this time is different. Well, there are a lot of things that are different this time. And here's the thing, guys. With all the stimulus being pumped into the market, it's all aimed at the buying side for the most part, which increases demand, right? So you have a lot of money chasing the same houses for sale, even though there's very few of them relative to the amount of people want to buy. That's what has driven the price up so high. And there's not that many programs aimed at getting people to sell, except for this new White House initiative trying to give people $10,000 to sell their house, which probably isn't going to work, because that 10 grand is peanuts compared to what they're saving on having a low mortgage rate and what they're going to have to face going into buying a new home if they were to leave and sell that one. Now, if the government does come out with a way to stimulate the selling side of things that is more effective down the road, that could potentially lead to a lot of people selling homes and an eventual price crash. But so far, I haven't seen them announce anything that I think is really going to move the needle in terms of listings. But my thinking is that even if the government does nothing to stimulate the selling side of things, one thing that we are seeing a lot right now is a lot more distress in the economy in all different things, and I will get to that a little bit later. But ultimately, this extra distress that we're seeing can lead to a lot of people listing homes for sale because this economy is so expensive right now and people are having a hard time in general. There's a lot of distress in this economy. I still think that can lead to a lot of people needing to sell homes down the road. You know, back in 2008, they came in and tried to rescue the housing market, but it was too late. If anybody remembers, we had the home prices crash, but then they started coming out with all the first-time home buyer tax credits and things like that to get people out there to buy homes again because nobody was buying them and there was just too many of them for sale. But it was too little too late. But this time, the government seems to be taking a proactive approach and trying to put all these programs in place before the housing market has a chance to crash. But I don't think that they can continue doing this indefinitely. And the main reason is because they're already pulling out the big guns now. Like, they're already giving all these incentives. They're already giving buyers free money. They're already doing all this stuff. And it's not really working. You know, you're not getting a lot of extra people out there to buy because even with these programs, it's still too expensive, right? So my thinking is, if we continue to see a lot of distress in the economy and more people are forced to sell, you're still not going to have that big wave of people come in and want to buy these extra houses because they won't be able to. And then when things inevitably start getting worse and we hit this recession, they're not going to have any levers left to pull. Other than the Fed lowering interest rates, there's not going to be a whole lot that can be done to save the economy or the housing market at that point in time. Sure, they can lower interest rates and give people more free money, but that's going to come at a huge cost, which means higher inflation, which means higher cost of living on everything, guys. It doesn't just increase the cost of housing, it increases the cost of everything that we buy. So one possible scenario or outcome in that situation, if they come in and try to continue rescuing the economy and inflation goes higher, then I think what we could see happen that would be different this time is we could see a housing crash, not in nominal terms, but in real values when adjusted for inflation. So say if home values remain relatively flat over the next 5 to 10 years, but they constantly keep stimulating the economy, even though home prices aren't really going down as the number on paper, the amount of inflation has actually decreased the value of the home because those dollars are literally worth less. So for everybody who's been saying, well, this time is different, maybe they're actually right. Maybe this time is different, and this crash might look nothing like the last crash if we have a housing crash when adjusted for inflation, because we didn't have this crazy inflation last time around. So home prices were able to go down in nominal terms. And of course, this is just brainstorming, guys. This is just one potential outcome of where this could go. And nobody really knows where it could go in the end. I find it extremely fascinating that as I'm sitting here making a video about how the housing market can crash and overall distress, we come across properties like this one. This house is blue tarps over the entire roof, so obviously major problems with that. They bought it back in 2021 for a little over $1 million, and oops, property taxes haven't been paid since they owned the house. These guys are probably in big financial trouble, apparently. I don't know how much they're asking for the house, but clearly they need to get out of it, and the house has major issues, lots of deferred maintenance here. This is the definition of distress, guys. People got into this house, got in over their heads, cannot make the payments anymore. That's what's happening. And one theory to sort of back up what I just said is we just got the most recent inflation report. The interest rates haven't moved, right? But yet inflation continues to inch back up. Even though we haven't lowered rates yet, they're already talking about lowering rates. If they start lowering rates in this environment, you can guarantee we're going to see a pretty big resurgence in inflation, guys, because already the rates that we have is not enough to completely squash it. But make no mistake, I'm not sitting here saying it's impossible to have a housing crash. But what I am saying is that the government and the Fed are doing a pretty good job of preventing it or kicking the can down the road for now. I don't know if they can do that indefinitely because we've never really seen this happen before, right? We had the crash in 2008. They weren't able to prevent it, okay? Were they trying to prevent it as hard as they are this time? I don't think so. So that is one reason I think we haven't seen that yet. But this time around, I feel like they know that we're facing a similar situation right now, and they're just throwing all the stimulus they can at it now in hopes that it will prevent the situation from even coming up. But there are many different signs of distress in our economy right now, and that's where I think we could see a big potential pot of people needing to sell homes. You know, here's just several examples of the distress we're seeing right now. We have credit card debt at all-time highs with delinquencies spiking on those. We have auto loan delinquencies spiking right now. We're starting to see foreclosures tick up and mortgage delinquencies also tick up. You're starting to see people not able to pay their utility bills. One of my subscribers sent me this, you know, in San Diego, California, for example, 25% of people in San Diego right now are behind on paying their gas and electric bill. 25%, guys, and think about that. San Diego is a rich area. This is not some poor part of the country. You're talking a rich area like San Diego, and you have people that are having a hard time paying their electric bill. 25% of them. It also just got announced that 401k hardship withdrawals are at an all-time high right now. I want to jump into that in more detail in a future video, so I'm not going to really get into that now, but just be aware that that's happening as well. That means people are borrowing from their retirement because life is too expensive today, is essentially what that means. And also, you have people like this. One of my viewers wrote this comment, which I'm gonna kind of rip apart here a little bit, because people like this make it look like the economy is going very well right now, when in fact there's a lot of underlying issues. Take a look at what this person said, okay? He says, I'm one of these people. I make about $120K a year. I've been carrying $10,000 to $20,000 in credit card debt for about 3 years now. I've taken out personal loans. I've taken out loans against my 401k, like we just talked about. My mortgage is only $1,000 a month, but my car payment is $1,300 a month, and I pay a lot in insurance. I own a few cars, so obviously he's paying a lot in car insurance. I'm 35, no kids, but I have a girlfriend that likes to constantly do stuff, and we eat out literally every day. Either breakfast, lunch, dinner. I need to get a second job, but my girlfriend complains about the lack of quality time for her. She has bills too, but doesn't make as much, so I always pay. Now, clearly, this guy has big time financial problems due to lack of being able to manage his money. His problem isn't that he doesn't make enough money. He clearly makes enough money, unless he lives in San Francisco or LA or New York City. Unless you're living in places like that, $120,000 a year should be plenty in pretty much any area of the country to live a decent life. But yet, this guy is buried in debt, okay? He's $20,000 in credit card debt and eating out every day, constantly spending, probably putting a lot of that on the credit card, you know, keeping up with an expensive girlfriend. You know, that's the kiss of death when it comes to finances, guys. And also having more than one car and paying all this money for cars, like this guy's paying more for his cars than he's paying for his mortgage. So this argument that people say, well, no one's going to stop paying on their mortgage because it's so low. Like, oh, well, you have 3% mortgages and have a $1,000 a month mortgage payment. That's not true, because people like this are the prime example of how you can still stop paying your bills even if you make a lot of money, even if you have a low mortgage payment, due to irresponsibility. And not that he's asking, but my advice to this guy would be to get rid of all of this stuff, possibly even the girlfriend, but have a talk with her first. Maybe she doesn't know that he's, you know, struggling financially. I don't know how new his relationship is with her. I don't know, you know, what their dynamic is. Maybe he's the kind of guy that just likes to, you know, look like the big shot, like I can pay for everything, and she just thinks he can afford it. Maybe that's the case, and it's not really her fault. Or maybe she's just a high maintenance chick that expects the guy to pay for everything, and if that's the case, maybe it's better to ditch her. And that can work both ways, by the way, guys. I'm not just saying that men should ditch high maintenance women. Women should ditch high maintenance men as well. So there's that. Because in this economy, people like that are just going to drag you into the pits. But I mean, look at this. This guy's taking hardship withdrawals from his 401k, and he's paying over $1,300 a month just on car payments, and who knows how much on insurance he didn't put here. Like, he's paying more for cars than he's paying for a place to live. That's upside down. You need to pay off that credit card debt, which should be pretty easy with the salary that you're making and only having $1,000 a month car payment. So this guy could turn things around pretty fast if he's smart about it. But if he's not smart about it, he can easily lose everything. And I'm glad I saved this example for this video, because this is how we can have a housing crash. If you have a lot of people out there living like this, even though they look like they're doing well, because imagine this guy's out, this is the guy you see that has, 3 cool cars in the driveway and is always out at the fancy restaurants with his girlfriend, maybe taking fancy trips. It looks like they're living the high life, right? And they are, but they're living it on borrowed money. So you can't always take these things at face value and just assume that these people are doing well, because they could be struggling financially as this person is. And I hope if you're watching, whoever wrote this comment, that you dig yourself out of this. But then we also have additional problems brewing on the business and banking side of the economy as well. I did a video at the beginning of this year about the retail apocalypse, of how many different stores have been closing across the country and how many closed in 2023. And the net amount of businesses that have opened is pretty abysmal. To add to that, Dollar Tree, they just announced that they're going to be closing 600 more stores this year. That should also be a wake-up call. If you have the dollar store not doing well right now, that's a pretty clear indicator that things are not going as well as we're being told, because that's literally the cheapest place to buy just about anything that you want to buy. And if they need to close 600 locations, they must not be doing too good. We've also seen the amount of corporate bankruptcies, shoot through the roof over the past several months. And the commercial real estate right now is an absolute disaster, guys. And what that means is, because of all the problems with commercial real estate, we could easily see more bank failures in the next year or two. All these banks are holding on to these bad loans with these commercial properties. And this is why I say that they're doing a very good job delaying this whole economic crash or housing crash, whatever you want to call it, because even with all these problems happening, they're still able to make it look like things are going well on the surface, which is an achievement in itself. I'll give them that. But I just don't think they can keep this up indefinitely, because they can't control everything, right? Like, they can't control the amount of commercial debt that needs to be refinanced and how much value these office buildings are losing and how many banks might go under because of that. There's nothing they can really do to prevent that from happening. Those are problems bigger than the Fed and the government can solve. Same thing goes if a lot of people are having a hard time paying their bills and need to sell their house because of that. There's nothing that they can really do to prevent that from happening, except for go back to the foreclosure moratoriums and, make it illegal for lenders to foreclose on properties. That's one way to go about it, I suppose. They proved that they can do that already during the pandemic. So I think the new question we should be asking is not, is there going to be a housing crash or an economic collapse? I think the answer is yes. But the question is just going to be when. A lot of people think it's going to be right after the election, but the reality is nobody really knows. Here we have a house for $2.35 million, and it was purchased all the way back in 2019 for $990,000 and has since been a rental property. The most recent rental, it rented for $10,000 a month in August of 2023. Well, now they're looking to sell, probably because the property isn't mathing anymore. Check this out, yet another property not paying the property taxes, guys. 35 grand of unpaid property tax bills here. Another sign of distress. Unbelievable that this is the second one in a row on the same walk here. We can even go back to my example with Florida and residential real estate to kind of show how this might play out as well. Anybody who saw my video from a couple days ago, I outlined how Florida is pumping an additional $400 million into the housing market this year, just in Florida. But unlike in most places across the country, despite these efforts, The inventory in the Florida housing market is absolutely exploding, guys. Inventory growth year over year throughout the state right now is 46%, which is much higher than any other state by a long shot. And here's the thing, there's nothing that the government and the Fed can do about that. And we can sit here and guess and speculate all day long on why there's this huge increase in inventory. You can say it's distress. You can say people just want to cash out and make a profit. I think it's a combination of both. You have a lot of people that have owned homes for a long time or even not that long and just want to cash out and take that money and run. At the same time, you have people that literally cannot afford to keep their homes anymore due to how much the property insurance and property taxes have skyrocketed. So I know for sure a lot of it is distress because of how much expenses to be a homeowner here has gone up. So that's a big reason you're seeing this uptick in listings. I'm telling you, this video was just meant to be, and it's really proving my point here. Another listing for $1.6 million that they bought back in 2021 for only $815,000. And another one not paying the property taxes, another one delinquent. All three properties I came across for sale in this video are not paying the property taxes. So just like the example of this young man from earlier that is living way beyond his means, doesn't have any money even though he makes a lot of money. This is a rich neighborhood, guys. This is Miami Shores, and people make a lot of money supposedly here. But that doesn't guarantee that you're going to be able to keep the house. All three of these people are not paying their property taxes, which are clear indicators of distress. And I think you're going to see more and more of this as the economy continues to worsen and get more expensive. And so, for example, since we're having this huge uptick in inventory here in Florida, even though we're getting this $400 million windfall to help stimulate the housing market, it's probably not going to be enough, in my opinion, to prevent price declines in the areas where inventory is exploding the most. Because you always have to remember, real estate is a game of supply and demand. So the government can try to stimulate all they want and give people, free money to go buy houses and all of this. Well, there's a couple things. Number one, even if they do that, if the price of the house is still too much, they're not going to be able to buy it. Even if they do that, a lot of people don't want to buy a falling knife, right? If you see the values sinking in an area, who wants to go in there and buy and be the last one holding the bag? Nobody, right? And so in a situation like this, where supply is quickly starting to outpace demand, I think you can easily see home prices crash. Now, is it going to be on the magnitude that we saw in 2008? I don't know, guys. My guess would be probably not, but I could be wrong. So the question is also, when does this happen and what triggers all of this new supply? And if you can answer that, well, then you're a fortune teller. You can tell the future, because I don't know the answer to that. But if we just look at what happened back in 2008, we all know what caused the housing market crash back then. It was way too many bad loans, which means people got into homes they couldn't afford, and therefore the foreclosure rate spiked, right? There's no disputing that. That's what happened. That's why we had the housing crash. And so everybody who says today that there won't be a housing crash because lending standards have gotten better and we don't have all these bad loans anymore, I sit there and question, is that really true? Because even though lending standards have gotten better and they don't just give anybody with a pulse a loan anymore, we still have 1% down mortgages. We still have all these programs to give people free money to get into homes, free down payments, all of that stuff. And those are all aimed at people that really can't afford to buy a house, okay? Those are people who qualify for those programs. But you have to realize one crucial element of this here. That only helps people like that get into the home initially. It does not help them continue to afford the home once they already own it, which I see as the biggest glaring issue that most people aren't looking at with this. Allowing people to put 1% down payment on their mortgage in order to get into a house doesn't prevent their property tax bill from going up. It doesn't prevent their homeowner's insurance from spiking. It doesn't prevent them from not having money for an emergency when something goes wrong with the house. It doesn't prevent any of that stuff. So people like that can still have major financial problems even though they were able to buy the house off the back of the taxpayers. And we know inflation is still going up. The most recent report just came out to prove it. And with all these expenses continuing to go up, You know, nobody can argue that the incomes are not keeping up with all these expenses. And so just to get people into the house is only half of the problem. It doesn't help these people continue to afford those homes. So do I think it's possible to see widespread distress just like we did back in 2008? 100%. I absolutely do think it is possible. Now, one thing I do think I was wrong about is the timeline on all of this happening. I underestimated the government's ability to kind of prolong all of this longer than I thought. I'm sure a lot of other people thought the same thing. However, like I said earlier, can they continue doing this indefinitely? I don't think so, because their tools only reach so far, guys, and there's things that are outside of their control. Just like I said, look at Florida as an example. You know, we see the biggest inventory spike here versus any other state. They can't do anything to stop that from happening. Regardless of the reason it's happening, it is happening. And I'll also say that when you blow up a bubble this big, I think it's inevitable that it's gonna have to pop at some point. But the question is, can we still fit more air in it? You know, I think that's the question that the government and the Fed is asking themselves right now. Can we blow up the bubble a little bit higher before it bursts? That's what they're always continuing to try to do. I think that's their number one goal, actually. So ultimately, my advice hasn't changed when it comes to real estate, guys. I think people should be extremely cautious right now, more than ever. If you're thinking about buying a home, you really need to know your market and what's happening with local laws there, especially regarding Airbnb laws. You need to know what's happening with inventory trends, rental market trends, all of that stuff. Somebody asked me like, well, Michael, it sounds like you're disappointed that things aren't going as bad as you've been saying. Well, it's not that I'm disappointed in that. I'm disappointed that our leaders would rather keep things more expensive for everyone than let it come back down to reality. That's what I'm disappointed in. I'm disappointed in the people in charge that are allowing this to happen and are squeezing us all dry. That's what I'm upset about, guys. You know, they sit there and tell us that they're trying to make things better and they're trying to make things more affordable with all these programs, when what they're actually doing is just making everything exponentially more expensive. So once again, our politicians are lying to us and they're telling us they're doing one thing while they're actually doing something else behind the scenes. And anybody who believes them and anybody who believes all these headlines that things are still going so well, I'm sorry, is a fool. Because you're being tricked is really what it comes down to. After all this video, guys, yes, I think we can still have a housing crash. I don't think it will look exactly like it did last time for all the reasons I outlined here. And I'm not giving you predictions on the date that it's going to happen or how much things are going to go down by or this and that, because with all of the artificial stimulus, that's actually an impossible prediction to make. But you know, I'm committed to keeping you posted on what's happening, which I think is the most important thing. You know, staying informed and knowing what's happening right now will give you the best idea of what to expect next. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.